Sheinbaum is a lifelong leftist whose parents were leading activists. She backed her predecessor, former President Andrés Manuel López Obrador's AMLO's initiatives and ran on expanding them, including overhauling Mexico's judiciary. The 62-year-old reached a second milestone as the first person of Jewish heritage to win presidency there, and the first woman. Here to discuss all things, Claudia Sheinbaum is staff writer for The Hill. Rafael Bernal, welcome. How much of a nothing burger or a big burger is this?
Well, Gustavo Petro is as reviled by his enemies as he is feared by his allies for his big mouth. He tends to go off. He's famous in Colombian politics for going off. It's a pretty big nothing burger in the sense that sort of social support for the pan-Latin American left in Mexico City in the 1980s was pretty much a given for someone in Claudia Sheinbaum's background. I don't imagine this at all meant her, carrying an AK-47 or sending money for weapons to Colombia. And in any case, when she became a student activist, it was after M19's most notorious terrorist attack.
So Petro was, however, a part of this group, has admitted to being part of this group. So what is his relationship like with Sheinbaum that he's decided to make this accusation?
I'm not sure they've ever met before in person, to be honest. This is a sort of an extensive, it's just, again, back to this pan-Latin American, it was cool in a certain crowd in Mexico City in the 80s to support certain Colombian guerrilla groups, M19 among them. They were a very urban guerrilla group. Petro has been sort of mocked even for his, some people call him a Kashmir guerrilla. It's unlikely that he really knows to what extent she participated. It is absolutely certain that she was among a group of leftist college students who formed an organization in the Mexican National University that very much supported movements like M19.
I mean, you said the critical thing here was there were a lot of movements at the time pushing back against the government in Colombia, and this movement actually became a party, a political party. So it is, in a sense, part of an institution that exists there, just as, some political parties around the world form out of revolutions, pushback. So, I mean, I think of Bill de Blasio. When Bill de Blasio ran for mayor, they called him supporting the Sandinistas because he went down to Latin America. I mean, it was a great talking point. It's great for the far right to push back. I'm just curious, who is this supposed to resonate with? Is it supposed to resonate with Mexicans? I mean, she was clearly voted in with majority, and it's historic beyond measure. So who are they trying to sway? And furthermore, what is the vibe in Mexico right now? I mean, as she's preparing for her presidency, she just got inaugurated.
I mean, the first question, back to Gustavo Petro's big mouth. Like, I don't know who he was trying to sway. Yes, M19 became a political party. They disbanded in 1990, made peace with the government. They had this horrible incident in Colombia Supreme Court in 1985, which ended up with like half of the Supreme Court dead. And it was mostly the government doing the killing. But so that was a terrible incident. They sort of got over it. The vibe in Mexico right now is Claudia Sheinbaum's. She gave two addresses yesterday. In neither one did she even recognize the opposition. The opposition doesn't exist.
What opposition? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean those people, the 30% of people who voted for the opposition, might as well have lit their ballots on fire. So that's sort of the vibe. She is trying to be more of a. She had a very conciliatory tone toward, for instance, investment, both foreign and domestic. Much more of an environmentalist than AMLO. Much less combative. She was very presidential compared to him. He's always had this sort of casual vibe that the opposition hated, and the opposition, before her address, every lawmaker from the opposition that talked was really trying to sound conciliatory toward her. And she just ignored them.
Wow.
What is her relationship going to be like with the American president, if that's Kamala Harris, if that's Donald Trump? Obviously, immigration is the top issue on voters' minds. It's going to be very important for the next administration to work with Mexico to come up with some fix to our problems here. What is that relationship likely to look like?
So Claudia Sheinbaum's presidency is, I'm 99% sure, going to be defined by the results of the election here. There's two very different scenarios. If you have two women heads of state, sort of from the left-wing parties, whether their left-wing credentials are great or not, but from the left-wing parties in North America, renegotiating or reopening the books on the USMCA in 2026, that is one scenario. And that in that scenario, for instance, there will be a lot of talk about the environmental bits of that treaty. If you have Claudia Sheinbaum, who is sort of very, like a very straightforward, serious, no jokes kind of person, dealing with Donald Trump and keeping immigration at the forefront for the next 4 years, the first 4 years of her presidency, you have a completely different scenario, and who knows what happens in 2026. So the Mexicans are very concerned, especially not so much about the immigration stuff. They think they kind of have a handle on that. They're greatly responsible for the reduction in crossings at the U.S.-Mexico border. They're very concerned about the USMCA in 2026.
Mexico is a complicated state to lead. I don't think any president, leader has been able to avoid having to deal with the cartels. AMLO just shoved a judiciary reform that some say is going to empower the cartels more. Can you explain a little bit about this reform and why it is significant, and also just how Sheinbaum perhaps has to maneuver that, given all of the other growth that's happened in Mexico? There's still the violence of the cartels, and a mayor was just killed, was it yesterday or today?
Yeah, I mean, political violence in Mexico, which really hadn't been a problem since the revolution of 1910, 1920, is over the top. The reform, the basics of the reform is all federal judges are going to be elected up to the Supreme Court. So that is a huge change. They had a meritocratic system for judges. That, oddly enough, that was the one part of the judiciary that did work, was a selection of judges. Anyway, that's gone, and the Morena party, Claudia Sheinbaum's party, AMLO's party, is going to have a lot of control over who gets to run. And voters are going to have very little control over who they're voting for, because they're going to have these gigantic ballots. And, you know, if down ballot candidates in this country feel a little bit ignored by the voters, like the district judge in Mexico is going to be like, nobody's even going to know their name, like who they're voting for. They're not even going to care. So there's going to be a lot of political control over the judiciary. The question is, and this is Sheinbaum's biggest challenge, is she's left with a lot of control, a lot of power in a country that's become deinstitutionalized, that's become really dependent on the party in control, on the government party. Mm-hmm. The question is, will she control the party, or will AMLO control the party?
And how do they relate with the National Guard and the cartels? How are they going to be able to?
There's less evidence of direct contact between Sheinbaum and the cartels than there has been between AMLO and the cartels. Whether that will work in her favor is still in question.
Rafael, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Pleasure.
We have more Rise